You are tuned in to Love Your History, hosted by Preston Love Jr.
Hello there, I'm Preston Love Jr. I want to welcome you to our monthly broadcast and on Love Your History with me, Preston Love Jr., your host and the talker, mostly. We surely will have guests down the road, but for now, it's just me and you. And I hope that you enjoy this segment. This segment of Love Your History, we're going to focus on something that's a new concept for most of my Omaha audience, and that is the phenomena called Black August. How many of you know that? Not many of you do. Black August is something that I want to educate you on, and it has maybe a more profound future here in our city. There are many, many cities that celebrate Black August at the same level that is being celebrated by Black History Month and Juneteenth, Black August. And so what I want to share with you is a panel that I participated with, and we talked from several angles about Black August. But before I do, I wanted to mention that it's always my thrust to talk about history. That's why I want you to love your history. And I want to put a couple pins in a couple important parts of history that occurred since you've seen me last in last month's broadcast. One is that we honored here in our dear North Omaha one of our rising and important personalities now, Miss Simone Sanders. Miss Simone Sanders is a product of North Omaha, the son and daughter of many, many of us know Simone Sanders. I said the son and the daughter. I was going another direction. I'm saying that Simone is an important person in the current, and we surely celebrate her. But I bring her up at this time because Simone was honored by having a street named after her. Right at not too far from here, she was honored at the corner of 22nd and Sprague, where she grew up and where her mother, Terry Sanders, still lives, and her street was named after her in the Simone Sanders Way, I believe it's named. So I wanted you to note that in your notes that we have so many. My understanding is we have about 36 streets that have been named after celebrities, African-American celebrities from our community, in our community, there's a street named after them. I could probably take a stab at naming all 36 and end up naming only 27 because I can't remember them all. I surely know a lot of them, including my father, Preston Love Sr., their street is named after him on 24th Street between Lake and Ohio. I think of Bertha Calloway, who has a street named after her from 24th to 22nd on Lake, and so many, many others. I could just start naming them. The only reason I won't is because I don't think I can remember them all. But every one of them are important people, so many. I think I will get that list and share with you in one of the future broadcasts. I would also share with you that the Great Plains Black History Museum is now honoring all of those 36 with a display, a mobile display, where not only the street and the person is being honored, but a little bio on each one of them. It's an exhibition that is now in play. We're here for this show. I would hope that you would get down and visit the Great Plains Black Museum and receive that wonderful exhibit that they're putting together. I would add to this a short note on historical figures that who have been recently honored since the last broadcast. I add to that list the unbelievable, fantastic athlete, Mr. Gale Sayers. Gale Sayers was honored several days ago by Central High School with a unbelievable, wonderful, and dramatic bronze statue, full statue. And so I urge you to get yourself by Central High in the courtyard between the old and the new buildings, the wonderful statue of Gale Sayers. And I surely was he was a dear friend of mine. I was a friend and competitor since we were teenagers in Little League football. He and his brother Roger, and then myself played against each other at Little League football way back then, and then on to play against the two rival schools, Central and Tech. We were rivals. And then I, of course, played football for Nebraska, and Gale Sayers played for Kansas University. We were rivals then. And then I stepped away. That's one good way of saying it, because I tried to play pro. I was drafted by Detroit Lions, but I didn't make it. And Gale did make it with the Chicago Bears and went on to become a Hall of Famer. Gale Sayers, wonderful story. And so I say all of that, and I will say to you that I would like you to enjoy the short video that will not only explain to you about Black August, but also my response to the definition part of the panel that I was on about Black August, my perspective, and that we're going to show you on tape. The first thing that you will see is a kind of a very brief introduction to Black August by Franklin Thompson. And then you will then see my comments after that. I hope that you will enjoy it, but I also hope that you would learn about my perspective and your perspective on Black August.
Good evening, good afternoon, everyone. Barry Thomas, my pronouns are he, him, his. I proudly serve as a member of the steering committee for the Omaha Community Council for Racial Justice and Reconciliation. I want to make sure that we start our meeting appropriately, or start our conversation appropriately. And I'm just going to start us off with a land acknowledgement. And I'll just read from what I have here. We begin by acknowledging that we meet on traditional lands served by the Omaha people. We honor America's first people and all elders, past, present, and emerging, and we are called on to learn about and share what we learn about the tribal history, culture, and contributions that have been suppressed in telling the story of America. And so with that, if I may, just kind of get us started around, or wrap, or get our wheels turning around the conversation of what is Black August, as I prepare to introduce our lovely speakers this evening, this afternoon. And so as being completely transparent and open, I just recently, within the last year or two, was familiarized with the concept of Black August. I spend Saturday mornings what I call studying. There's a program that comes on YouTube hosted by Karen Hunter, who's got a radio show on Sirius XM, and Dr. Greg Carr, who's the chair of the Black Studies Department at Howard University. They get together every Saturday morning and just really kind of talk about the current events and talk about modern issues, but they do so in a Africana studies framework. where they explore whatever may be, I mean, from Ukraine to the Supreme Court to whatever the topic may be hot for that particular week. They spend quite a bit of time just kind of examining and making these really, really fascinating connections to Black culture and Black history through this lens of how we look at the modern world. And so last year, last August, I want to say, I think it was 2021, they engaged in a conversation around Black August. And again, it was something that I was not familiar with. And so I started learning, I started listening to that show, and then it really kind of took a deep dive into all of these different, the different examples of what Black August stands for, which is basically, it's a moment to recognize the liberators of Black and African peoples who have been unjustly treated by the state. And, you know, if I could make it a one sentence, I think that would be the one way I can define what Black August is. It's a way of remembering any and all peoples who have fought for Black liberation and been unjustly treated by the government. And so if you could think about the spectrum of how long and how deep, you know, the centuries long way of examining the injustices offered upon or put upon people, not just Black people, but people who sought to help Black people receive freedom. You know, interestingly enough, and I should also add, and it's also kind of evolved into additional conversation about mass incarceration of Black bodies at the same time. So it originally kind of started out in the 70s, and I don't mean to steal our presenter's thunder, but it really just started off as a conversation originally about, you know, the Black Panther Party and those individuals who were fighting in the Black Panther Party who were being investigated by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and being in Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, and the work that was being done serendipitously to, you know, basically track and monitor these people who were trying to give humanity to Black people within these United States. But I also would ask you to consider framing it outside of just the walls of these United States, because throughout the Caribbean, throughout Africa, if you even think about Nelson Mandela and the years that he was incarcerated unjustly for trying to fight for liberation of Black bodies in South Africa, there's a myriad of examples of Black people who were trying to fight for the liberation of the Black and all peoples, I should say, because when we throw abolitionists into the conversation, they also sought criminal and unjust penalty for trying to fight to end slavery. And even not even throwing big names out there, but just the everyday people, like the enslaved people who fought and ran away from enslavement, that were unjustly incarcerated and brought back into the plantation culture. So again, this can go a lot of different ways when we start talking about what is Black August. And I brought this to our steering committee for consideration a few months ago. Can we have some time in August to talk about what is Black August? Can we have some time as a Omaha Community Council for Racial Justice and Reconciliation to dig deeper into, to have a community conversation about, you know, the struggle for Black liberation and those that are, you know, held unjustly accountable for that. And I was granted the space to put a program together. And you know, as I know, I'm not the most in-depth scholarly or expert in this particular topic. I thought about the people who I know locally who are fighting for Black liberation, the liberation of Black people through health, the liberation of Black people through voting, the liberation of Black people through the criminal justice system.
Well, first of all, surely a pleasure. I want to quickly say that I am glad I'm here, but not because I'm a speaker, because I surely enjoyed every minute of Terry Crawford's presentation. I hope you did too. And so I didn't really research my comments. I began to take notes, Terry, on things that you both said, and I could speak for 4 hours. Surely good. I see you smiling back there, Chris. But on just response to many of the things that you said. I would say that if I had to put a title on whatever I say, it would be, and I'm not a singer, but if I could sing the title, it would be Deja Vu. Deja Vu. These conversations have gone on in my life over and over. And the good has been there, but the bad and ugly has returned. And our response sometimes is to talk about it, sometimes to act. It's a deja vu situation. I want you all to know that I don't have any hair dye at home. This gray that you see is natural. I am 80 years old. And I speak to you as someone who has lived for 80 years, but I've experienced, I have observed, I have studied, and to a small degree taught so much of what we will talk about and have talked about today. Can I ask you to just bear with me as I asked you where you were in life in 1975? Well, I'd already started down the road in 75. And by 1980, I was in Atlanta working for Andrew Young, who, as you may not know or may know, he was part of the inner circle with Martin Luther King. Andrew Young, also ambassador and mayor of Atlanta. While there, I became immersed in the civil rights families and in the civil rights of things at that point of time. It was the post-civil rights era, but the period in which we were in was analogous to the Reconstruction period. We were successful in the adjustments to the Constitution with the 13th Amendment as relates to slavery, the 14th Amendment, which relates to equal rights, so to speak, equal rights under the law, and the 15th Amendment. They were successes, so to speak, in adjusting the Constitution, and we had a period where we grew out of that adjustment. Are you with me so far? But that adjustment was made also in the form of civil rights legislation, the 1964 Civil Rights Act, the 1965 Voting Rights Act, the 1968 Fair Housing Act were victories from the civil rights movement. But in the 80s, we were fighting the same battle as we did after the Reconstruction period that grew a giant Jim Crow to push back on those victories. And the 80s was a pushback period. I was in Atlanta in that time frame. Martin Luther King had been assassinated. John F. Kennedy had been assassinated. Medgar Evers had been assassinated. Robert Kennedy had been assassinated. Malcolm X had been assassinated. Martin Luther King, I mentioned, had been assassinated. Are you getting the point? There was a pushback. And some parts of that was the assassination physically of our leaders. And so you ask the question with the list of names about another list, Marcus Garvey and all of that. They too were assassinated in their relative time frames. Not all of them were assassinated with a bullet. Some of them were assassinated by their character, misinformation. Some of them were assassinated and put in jail for the rest of their lives. In the case of Mr. George, he was assassinated and assassinated in the jail and maybe on purpose. My point is, first, I got in the fight, if you will, in the 80s. In 83, I stood and worked heavily to get elected, not only Andrew Young, who became the mayor, and worked with Maynard Jackson and all of his wonderful history, but the first Black mayor of Chicago, Harold Washington, who was to some degree a Black nationalist himself. He died unexpectedly as he tried to begin his second term. Most of you probably don't know that story. Harold Washington was a giant of a man. He became the mayor, but he too was a victim, as we speak of victims. And so I was there in 83. In 84, after Shirley Chisholm had run for president in 1972, the first major person of color to run for president was Jesse Jackson. He was the biggest thing in America, Black or white. He was as big as Beyonce for another reason. He was the rock star. He was everything. I was his campaign organizer and his campaign manager. My point, and I will stop there, is I've been down this road, deja vu. And I would say that if I had a subtitle for my comments, and I don't have an organized piece of comments, there's a couple things. If you are 80 and you have been in the struggle for 40 to 50 years, it is hard to talk and be straightforward and clear, because I do have so much in my head that anything, any pull of my coat, any important speech like you made, Terry, makes my mind go crazy, because I have some personal involvement in almost all of the things that we say. I know that may not make sense to all of you, because I was not here in Omaha most of your years here. I came back home in 2006. My famous dad had died. My mother had Alzheimer's. So some of you know me from when I came back. I had challenges when I came back. But you still, some of you, see me that person. I'm not that person anymore. And you need to get over it. Some of you see me because you have met me lately. But I want you to know that all of that is an accumulation of someone who's experienced life and these issues in a complex, up close sort of way. I speak from wisdom now. from the gray hair. And so I took notes, Terry, and here's the way I'm going to give you my speech. Oop, there's a little bit over here, there's some over here. There's that much. But let me just give you some words if you're taking notes, mental or otherwise. And it would be these few words: fairness, bias, racism, and amnesia. Amnesia, yes. Racism, biases, and fairness. My concluding comments in about 2 hours, I'm kidding, will be that silence is no longer an option. No matter what we talk about, how we get into it, how we agree or disagree, we're at a place in time that only someone 80 maybe can give you that perspective. We're in a place of time where silence should not be an option. It was not a silence was not an option in the Reconstruction period. Great things happened there. Silence was not an option in response to Jim Crow, the civil rights movement. Silence should not be an option. As we sat at the table, my friend William King began to start a list that I could finish, but he said things like, wow, we're divided. There's divisiveness. And he stopped because we were interacting, but I could add to that list supremacy, white supremacy, and hate, and divisions of all types, and disrespect for women, and ignoring our youth and the earth that they will live on. Some call that focused on climate change. What it really is being irresponsible to our kids and our grandkids. What kind of earth are we going to leave them? And the other part of that list, William, is being irresponsible and being too silent about the obvious, the misinformation and lies. And even war. Can you imagine when we go from this place and go to our homes, that when we get there, it would be devastated by bombs and our family would no longer be living? Imagine that. We can't even be silent on war, because what we may leave our children with is nothing if we do not become more than just a great conversation. I want to mention, part of your introduction is, what does all of this mean to us right now? Well, let me go back just a little now. You mentioned, Terry, in your comments, Vivian Strong. And so did Franklin. How many of you know, by show of hands, the story of Vivian Strong? I think the answer is half of you. All of you raised your hand. But I'm not sure you know the story of Vivian Strong, and I don't have the time to develop it. But believe me, she did not deserve to die. And believe me, the police that were called because several little girls were having too much fun, somebody called the police. And Vivian Strong, was shot in the back of the head amongst so many witnesses. She was a stone throw from her own house. I was with her brother 2 days ago. He cannot get all of that out of his head. And the police was found not deserving of any penalties. I used of my list of words, bias. That policeman, I do know his name, but that policeman was biased. He was angry, if you know the whole story. He was trigger happy. He said, I let him know, you better stop or I'm going to shoot. Shoot from little girls playing the music too loud? I wouldn't have stopped. I wouldn't have believed, well, today I would, but in those days, you wouldn't have believed that there was really going to be somebody shoot you because of that. Come on. Bias was the reason. And then that was in '69, just 2 years later. The former Black Panthers, may I say, for the record, that David Rice and Ed Poindexter were no longer with the Panthers. You know why? Because something you said. Let me get to that part. Something you said. You left out the name Edgar Hoover. You mentioned the counterintelligence movement, but they were going to get rid of the Black Panthers and anything associated with by any means necessary. So if they could orchestrate a situation where you would be killed, they would do that, our government. If they could orchestrate something that could take you to jail for the rest of their life, they did that. Yes. And so I say to you, in the essence of time, it's deja vu, George Floyd. I want to say this very quickly, because one of the things I could do with more time is I could start my speech. This was the introduction. With mass incarceration. But I don't feel comfortable standing before you as a man of wisdom to talk to you about mass incarceration, because mass incarceration is the result of what I should be talking to you about, which is an unjust criminal system that begins to be biased and unfair. When they take a high school kid out of high school and charge him with something, he's in the system. So charging the prosecution level is one part of the criminal justice system. Is unfair and it is biased. And then the idea of going before a unbiased and fair judge is only 50-50 at the best. That's part of the system. And then there is how much will this judge sentence somebody to prison who maybe could be helped in other ways. That's part of the criminal justice system. It's not fair. It is unbiased. And then when you get into the system that calls for a sale for 2 people, they may have 6 in there, and they may keep them there for 24 hours without ever letting them go outside. That's only part of the story of mass incarceration, because when you do that in the aggregate, you got masses of people incarcerated. That's what, but it doesn't end there either. Terry, no, you should know, is that how do they prepare those who are incarcerated to come out and be productive students? There's little of that going on. There's efforts, but it's small. And so I say to you, with the half hour I have left, I say to you, let me give you a horrible example. Ed Poindexter. He was with his friend David, a former member of the Ku Klux Klan. Yeah, that's really a slip. That is a dotted line in my mental process. But they were former members of the Black Panthers. And what was going on nationally is J. Edgar Hoover was they wiped out, they said publicly and otherwise, we're gonna wipe this group out because, they're a threat. They may even try to storm the Capitol. No, they didn't say that. And so they focused on them. And so right in 1970, a crime, it surely was a crime. Let me go on the record, a crime happened. And a policeman was killed, his partner was injured, but Ed Poindexter and David Rice did not do it. They were orchestrated to be done. There are several theories, I won't take the time, but here's what happened and happening. They were sentenced to life. The details are not to life without parole, to life. Ed Poindexter, you talked about George when he was in prison. He was an activist in prison, and they were out to get him because not only was an activist outside, when he got inside, he started some stuff. Ed Poindexter has been in jail for 52 years. He has been a model prisoner. He has received a degree. He has written 2 books. He has taught kids. He has never gotten in any trouble. Ed Poindexter has been a model prisoner for a crime he did not do. Even if he did it, don't you think it's time after 52 years that he is no threat to society? I'm trying to see if we went to the governor and you don't go to get someone out of prison. You don't go to the prison director. You go to the governor. And you ask that not the parole board, but the pardons board have some mercy and consider this gentleman and his record and all of the things. They won't even do that here. Not even that. In fact, there are people who are before the parole board, you should know, and I'll try to shorten this, who want to get their record of spouse. In other words, they're out, they're living their life. So they're on the list, the people that the parole board sees. So when I went to talk to the governor, they said, well, he's too far down the list, even if we put him on. I said, well, put him on top of the list. He's been in, come on with that. And so there's no way, because of politics. Many of us have worked over the generations before I came back home to try to get him released. And some have walked away in disgust and exhaustion. I'm at the disgust level, getting close to exhaustion. I'm hoping that a miracle happens. We elect the third party governor this time. No, I'm kidding. But that whoever is governor would be open to having a conversation about Ed Poindexter. And may I say to you all, don't be silent on Ed Poindexter. By the way, real quickly on Vivian Strong, we're going to put a plaque up right in the area where she was shot. We'll talk a lot about that later. I will close, if I may. Terry used this trick. How many of you are experts in religion. Well, I'm Pentecostal, and I know lots of Baptists. Let me show you a technique. And in closing, and then I'm going to talk for another 15 minutes. Yeah, but Terry, you know you use that, but I am going to close. I want to say this, that this idea of August, Black August, is one that I think the time is now for us not to be silent on that, because it gives us another avenue to have honest, straightforward, historical conversations about important things. Hold your hand up if you have gone with me on my annual tour down south. Look at that. Look at that. But when we go down there, we don't talk theory. We go to Martin Luther King's room that he was in the night he slept before he was assassinated. We look in the room at the truth. And so we need to have these conversations. And Black August provides us the forum to have it. Partly the reason why we haven't had it, by the way, when you ask people to hold up their hands, have you ever heard Black August? I proudly stuck my chest out and held up my hand. What I didn't say is it ain't been that long that I have. But my point is that we know now. Yes. Let's don't be silent. Let's don't be silent on Ed Poindexter. Let's don't be silent on Black August. Let's don't be silent on all the nonsensical stuff going on, not in the world, there's lots of it, not in the nation, there's lots of it, but right here. Voter ID, senseless, ridiculous, taken over the Department of Education by the governor. That's nonsensical. And we should not be silent on that. We're not too far for someone coming in the legislature talking about let's pick up the books that they don't like. We can't be silent on that. I could go down the list. My last word on my list was amnesia. And I say to you, those of you watching, don't expect Black people to have amnesia about the past. You can forget if you want to, but we remember Vivian Strong. We remember Ed Poindexter. We remember all the indignities of redlining and all of that. We remember that. We don't have amnesia about our background. Don't expect us to stand with you while you forget. And so I leave with you just, there is so much to talk about, so much to cover. I will sing to you Deja Vu. Thank you.
This has been Love Your History, hosted by Preston Love Jr. If you'd like to leave suggestions, email us at ewcfacts@gmail.com. That's ewcfacts@gmail.com. This is an EWC Communication production.